Hello, everyone. I'm Susanna Hayek, the content manager for Transglobal Events, the organizers of Carbon Capture Technology Expo, taking place in Messe, Bremen, Germany on 19 and 20 October. And joining me today is Ralf Dickel, who's a senior research fellow at the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. And we're here to discuss the importance of carbon capture and sequestration for Germany to reach its ambitious target of reaching net zero by 2045. Ralf, hello, Ralf. Thank you so much for joining me today. Could
Yes,
you
it's a
please
pleasure.
tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I myself, I was working for the energy industry most of my life, indeed. I worked first 20 years for the German electricity sector and mainly for the gas sector, indeed, almost 20 years for Burgas. And then I changed to work for international organizations, first for the World Bank, then for the International Energy Agency, and finally for the Energy Charter Secretariat, where I was Director of Transit and Trade, also during the exciting times of 2006 and 2009. Then, since I left the Energy Charter, I'm kind of a freelance expert, and I'm doing at times some contributions to arbitration cases, but then most of the time I was also active in the EU-Russia Energy Council, and I'm a regular reviewer of the World Energy Outlook of the International Energy Agency. And last but not least, I'm writing regularly for the Oxford Institute of Energy Studies. And my latest publication was Achieving Net Zero plus Renewable Energy Supply, the essential role of carbon dioxide sequestration. That's what we discuss, I suppose.
Yeah, lots of interesting facts and findings in your most recent research. So, Ralf, could you tell us about the current carbon capture and sequestration situation in Germany at the moment and the policies involved?
Yeah, basically, carbon capture and sequestration is still a bit of a taboo in German policies, in German energy policy, in German climate policy. It's not so clear why it came to it, but German decarbonization policy has been very much driven by renewable policy the last 20 years, and it's still driven by renewable policy and also, of course, by energy efficiency. The renewable policy in Germany was quite successful, but then again, carbon sequestration is basically not possible under the Carbon Sequestration Act of 2010. There was a time window where pilot projects could be done. That is over now, and therefore there's no legal basis for carbon sequestration. There is a basis for carbon dioxide transport, also with a view to export. There's also the possibility to expropriate to build carbon dioxide pipelines. So that is, so to speak, something we can build on if we find other countries to sequester the carbon dioxide for us. But sequestration inside Germany is a long way off for the time being.
Okay.
Yeah, then maybe you mentioned also the kind of carbon budget. And on the carbon budget, one must say that this is not a yardstick in German policy, except that there was a recent ruling by the Constitutional Court which took the carbon budget as a yardstick for its ruling. So in that regard, it entered the German policy, but it's not reflected in any government policy yet.
All right. So you go into quite a lot of detail about how perhaps it's not achievable to reach net zero by 2045 if carbon capture and sequestration are not in the equation. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, indeed. The paper comes to the conclusion that if you skip carbon capture and sequestration and rely only on energy efficiency and on renewable, you are not likely to achieve net zero before 2060s, eventually 2070s. And the main hindrance is that renewables come with intermittence, And while you can integrate renewable power production into a flexible power system up to a certain degree, maybe 80% of the overall electricity generated, the last 20% have to be dispatchable, meaning that you can produce them on demand. So that is completely different from renewable production. And on top of it comes that right now, only 20% of final energy is really covered by electricity. 80% is still covered by fossil fuel, by energy-rich molecules. That is something many people forget. And in many press articles, those who are writing it tend to equalize electricity production and energy production. So in that regard, you would have to transform renewable energy into dispatchable power. That's one point. And the other point is you would have to transform electric energy into energy-rich molecules. For both ways, you would need electrolyzers. Now, everybody knows electrolyzer from school. They're impressive experiments that are shown. And most of the time it works, but that is nowhere comparable to the size you need. Worldwide, right now, we have, or last year, we had about 300 megawatt of electrolyzers, half of them in China. Now, if you look on German renewables, we have about 100,000 megawatt of renewables. So that shows you the discrepancy, and the speed at which electrolyzers are developed and rolled out is not that impressive. Also, the efficiency of electrolyzers is not that high. It's maybe 75%. So that is one hindrance, so to speak, to have an all renewable world. And then when you produce hydrogen from electrolyzers, and you need also a system to transport and store hydrogen. Now we don't even discuss how to store hydrogen in larger volumes. It's possible, there's no doubt, you can store it in salt caverns, but we are not discussing at all to do this. And by the way, of course, the energy storage by hydrogen is only 1/3 of natural gas for the same volume. So that is one element why it's very difficult to see that an all renewable world will succeed in that time frame that we need. And the other one is also the speed at which renewables are built. Even if I take the quite ambitious speed, which is in our coalition agreement, then even at that speed, it would take until 2060s or 70s to achieve all of that. So there's a technical obstacle and a rollout obstacle. And there is also a rollout obstacle with regard to the speed of renewables. So all of that comes to the conclusion that no, renewables are absolutely necessary, but they will not make it in time.
So you're saying that there's still going to be heavy reliance on gas. Is that right?
Naja, yes and no. I mean, there's in the first step heavy reliance on fossil fuels. And then fossil fuels have to be decarbonized in order to keep within the climate targets, especially to keep with the carbon dioxide budget, which is rather small. And maybe coming back to this ruling of the Constitutional Court, which was very remarkable, both with regard to the ruling itself, which was saying the Carbon Protection Act is partly unconstitutional, and then also with regard to the arguments behind it. The Constitutional Court was referring to the carbon dioxide budget worldwide, and then also making the point that Germany could not claim more than corresponds to its population, which is roughly 1%. Then we end up with a very small carbon dioxide budget for Germany. And because of that, then the ruling was to say, you have to take action and you have to be more specific in the Climate Protection Act, because otherwise you curtail the freedom of younger generation today to the benefit of squandering kind of this carbon budget by the older generation. And that's why you have to have more ambitious targets and why you have to be more specific. So in that regard, so to speak, time is of the essence. And if you kind of bet the farm just on renewables, then you also risk that something will not work, it will take longer, there will be more obstacles eventually to build it all. And certainly to speed it up, a parallel way to have carbon sequestration is certainly just common sense, and that would also give the approach much more viability and robustness. So in that regard, renewables is absolutely necessary, but carbon capture is essential as well, and you need both. And if you do it well, and it's still very ambitious, and you have a chance to meet the 2045 net zero target.
Yeah, we also know that Germany has plans to phase out coal, but we've also seen recently, as a result of the war, that Germany has passed emergency legislation to operate coal in order to secure energy supplies. So do you think in order to do that and still remain within the carbon budget, then carbon capture and sequestration is absolutely essential?
Yes, I mean, in any case, it's absolutely essential. And switching from gas to coal for power generation for the larger political context given by the war, given by sanctions, and blaming each side, blaming the other side, then yes, I mean, to some extent we could use coal, and this will happen anyhow because of the merit order. And if you look for carbon capture and the power process, then one must say that carbon capture of exhaust streams from coal-fired power plants is a bit more technologically developed than from gas. For carbon capture from coal-fired power plants, you have two commercial scale examples, one in Canada, one in Texas, which work provided, so to speak. There's a bit support, financial support for the process. But with regard to carbon capture from gas-fired processes, that is still much more at the beginning. The difference is that, let's say, if in the exhaust stream of a gas-fired power plant, by necessity, you always will have some water. So you have carbon dioxide and you have water, and that makes it technologically more difficult to transport it. And to some extent, you also have to get rid of the water, because if you have kind of captured all the sulfur dioxide and so on, and basically you have just carbon dioxide as a result of a coal-fired power plant. And as a matter of fact, also in Germany, we have pilot projects for coal-fired power plants, but none for gas-fired power plants. So carbon capture of coal-fired power plants looks to be better advanced. It also is, of course, cheaper in national energy. That your base the power production on. I mean, lignite is here and it's cheap, whereas gas has to be imported. It's relative costly now. It's also volatile in pricing, but lignite is under our own control. The disadvantage of lignite is that you produce twice the carbon dioxide stream that you produce with natural gas. But then in order to be pragmatic, I think for Germany, it would be a good idea to push these pilot projects or small pilot projects we have to more commercial scale pilot projects, because that is also a technology which is needed worldwide.
Okay, so in order to start implementing carbon capture and sequestration, what steps does Germany need to start taking?
Naja, the starting point is that for some time to come, carbon sequestration inside Germany is really off. This is not realistic at all. You would have to change the law, and there's also the mindset of the population you would have to change. So the realistic way to do it is to export it and to have it sequestered offshore. I mean, onshore sequestration always comes in with concerns of the population, whether the carbon dioxide will leak, and so on. And even if it doesn't, and even if you have so many research done, as we did also in a pilot project in Ketzin near Berlin, then it will be very difficult to convince people. But to export it seems to be an option, and to have offshore sequestration is something where obviously even if it leaks, then it's not perceived as being dangerous. Now, in order to export it, well, first of all, you have to capture it, and capturing it, you have kind of the challenges in the power plants where you need some more development. You don't have challenges really in the creation of blue hydrogen via steam reformers or autothermal reformers, which is more or less a more special case of a steam reformer, where kind of you get carbon dioxide as the output, and that is done for 50 years or so in the ammonia industry, and you would have to purify it to some extent, and then to transport it, to some offshore areas, mainly Norway, where it could be sequestered and where eventually the country is pushing for carbon dioxide sequestration. So it needs, as a first step, kind of a process to capture it, which is, by the way, 50 to 60% of the overall costs. Then you need transport, and you need sequestration, which is the remaining 30 to 40% of the costs, and half of it may be transport and the other half sequestration. Now, in order to capture it, you need kind of somebody who pays for it. I mean, this is a, how should I say, this is a common good, a public good, and it's not, so to speak, demanded by the market, except, let's say, in cases where you can use the carbon dioxide, then there's a market demand. But if it's just to get rid of it forever, then there's no demand for it. Then there's just a waste product, and somebody has to pay for the waste. And that means that you have to have either subsidies or support, which is high enough to cover the costs, or eventually you can work via a penalty, which is high enough to force everybody to sequester it. Now, the United States, for example, they go the way of a support. They are just about to change their legislation regarding taxation benefits for sequestration. It just passed the Senate, and it's now in the House of Representatives. It's a bipartisan initiative, so you would expect that this will sail through. The present stage is that you get $50 per ton of carbon dioxide tax credit. And tax credit means that it's deducted from your tax, not just a credit, but it's just deducted. And this will be improved to the level of $100. And then we will certainly see a lot of sequestration projects coming up in the United States. Whereas in Germany, in the EU, that is, so to speak, a penalty. We have this emission trading regime, and the price of that is a penalty. Now, one must be also a bit precise. Carbon dioxide policy or decarbonization policy is partly in the hands of the EU, on the EU level. That's the emission trading regime. Partly it's more on the national level. That is a burden sharing decision. And carbon dioxide sequestration falls somewhere in between. I mean, partly it's on national level because you use national geology, that is, so to speak, under national sovereignty. So far, it's more for national legislation. But when it comes to carbon dioxide sequestration as an instrument of decarbonization policy, might also be on the EU level. And then it's neither part of the emission trading regime, nor is it part of the effort sharing decision. So in a way, it's a little bit like a stepchild. And so also when you look into the scenarios of the EU Commission, then you will see that they always use almost exclusively energy efficiency and what is linked to that, plus renewables, to construe model which reach the EU target. So coming back of what has to be done, I mean, there must be the money to pay for it. What we see now is that the emission trading price is coming close to 100. It's 96 now. So 100 is a level where one would believe that a lot of measures are becoming economically viable. But then one thing is, so to speak, that this penalty reached that level. And the other thing is that the industry and the actors have also enough actions to act. And as long as carbon dioxide sequestration is blocked by legislation, then it's just a penalty and not leading to any action. So that means that, so to speak, all the obstacles have to be removed, and obstacles on the German side is certainly that all the rules on transportation are not hammered out. I mean, it's clear by legislation, CO2 can be transported, you can expropriate for it, even for export, but you need the rules and you need also details on the procedure. And if you want to export it, then there's a major international obstacle, which is almost absurd. That is Article 6 of the London
Protocol,
right? Which basically says that, you should not export carbon dioxide to be sequestered in another country. While there was kind of a move to allow for sequestration for any country in its own sector, as an exemption to the London Protocol, there is not yet an exemption to Article 6, which does not allow to cross the border with carbon dioxide. And while there is a protocol which would allow for that exemption, it has not been ratified by enough countries. And that is
and it currently hasn't been. So there's been an amendment to Article 6 of the London Protocol, but that amendment or Article 6 has not been ratified in Germany. Is that right?
It has not been ratified in Germany. It has not been ratified by the quota that you need. Usually in all kind of amendments or in any international agreement, you need a certain quorum of, I don't know, 75%, 2/3, or a double quorum like in the Kyoto Protocol for it to enter into force. Now there is an initiative by Norway and the Netherlands, which is very interesting, also a very good idea per se, to say we have a provisional application of international agreements under the Vienna Convention. And so let's kind of allow any two countries who have ratified it and who want to provisionally apply it to do that in between them, provided they do deposit certain instruments with the IMO, which is the organization which is handling this London Protocol. Now that certainly would be, Germany and the Netherlands have deposited such an instrument, and that would certainly be a way for Germany to first ratify and then agree with Norway and maybe the Netherlands and whoever is interested on such provisional application to allow for carbon dioxide to cross the border.
Does Norway have the capacity? Because obviously Norway would need to also sequester its own carbon dioxide.
Yeah, but Norway is population-wise a small country with 5 or 6 million people. On top of it, its economy is to a very large extent based on hydropower. Even their cars are running on electricity to a large extent now. So their own needs for what they produce in Norway is not that large. If you would look on Norway, let's say what Norway is producing as carbon dioxide and how much carbon dioxide, what Norway is producing at hydrocarbons, oil and gas, and how much carbon dioxide results from that, then you come to some substantial numbers, maybe some 400 to 500 million tons of carbon dioxide, which result from Norwegian oil and gas. But Norway has a potential in the North Sea, which is its largest potential of about 70 gigatons. So that means there's enough room for Norwegian triggered carbon dioxide emission, or enough room for whatever Germany would need to sequester. And other countries in the neighborhood like UK, Netherlands, Denmark would probably use their own potential, and there would still be enough room for Belgium, France, Poland, which are close by, so that they could use the Norwegian potential. Yeah, so I mean, I could also say a little bit about Norway. I mean, in my Rogas time, I was responsible for buying Norwegian gas, which was good, and there was always a good cooperation with Norwegians. As Germany, we have built a cable to kind of balance the intermittence of wind energy in Germany with Norwegian hydropower. So there is quite good relations between us and Norway, and so Norway would really fit very well for taking that up from Germany, and Norway is very eager to develop carbon dioxide sequestration. It was in fact the first country to have carbon dioxide sequestration per se. I mean, as compared to carbon dioxide injection for enhanced oil recovery, which we have seen on a commercial basis in the United States for a long time now. But Norway was the first one with injecting the carbon dioxide from the Sleipner West gas, which had a high content, and it had to be separated, and Norway imposed a tax on emitting carbon dioxide, and then it was a much cheaper solution to sequester it in the Itzura aquifer formation, which is very close to the Sleipner field. And later on, Norway also had a second project in Snøhvit, where the carbon dioxide, which falls out of the liquefaction process, is then sent back to the area of the Snøhvit field over 100 kilometers and sequestered there. So Norway has a lot of experience in sequestering carbon dioxide, and also has now, so to speak, a vision with the Longship project and the Northern Lights project, where on one side Norway is, under the Longship project, carbon dioxide is collected from Norway and potentially also from other countries if they get the London Protocol right, and then it's sequestered in a formation near the Troll field. And Norway is also heavily supporting these processes. I mean, there are two processes which are supported in Norway itself. One is a cement factory in Brevik, which produces over 0.4 million tons carbon dioxide will be sequestered. The other one is waste incineration in Oslo, where also 0.4 million tons of carbon dioxide will be sequestered. Both projects are supported by about €1 billion. So that's really showing the engagement of Norway.
Absolutely. If Germany were to sort out the legislation that would enable it to export CO2 to be sequestered in Norway, what infrastructure is needed?
Basically, you could transport carbon dioxide by ship, also by inland ships, and then eventually you would have to unload the ships, for example, in Rotterdam, on a larger carbon dioxide carrying tanker, bring it to Norway, and that is certainly always good for a start, because you can build it up and you don't run into kind of the upfront economies of scale. But in the longer run, given the volumes of carbon dioxide which should really be sent from Germany to Norway, which is in the order of 200 to 300 million tons, then certainly transport by pipelines would be a better choice and more economic choice. And that would need also some cooperation between Norway and Germany on what is the route. Basically, you would most likely choose a route which is, so to speak, retroverso, the gas pipeline. So basically, you collect everything in Germany, you bring it to the North Sea coast, near Emden or near Dornum, which is in between, Emden on one side and on the other side Hamburg, and that means that you have to cross the Waddenzee, which is a protected area. So you could use the same approach that we used for landing the gas in Germany, namely you build a tunnel under the protected area, which worked quite well, and then from there you transport it to places in Norway where you would have clusters for sequestration. And now that would need quite some cooperation between Norway and Germany to make sure that you build corresponding infrastructure on both sides. That must be coordinated, and there are many details. Again, crossing the Waddenzee, then the pressure management of carbon dioxide is no rocket science, but it must be managed nevertheless. You need also a relative steady flow when you inject the carbon dioxide into the, especially in aquifers, in order to avoid that the carbon dioxide is clogged in this aquifer. So there's a lot of things in detail which would have to be coordinated, and we have seen such coordination things in the past. There are always joint commissions you can create, And usually that works quite well.
Okay. And you mentioned two failed sequestration projects and one successful one in your study. What, in your opinion, what are the features of a successful project, and how would a sequestration project gain the backing of the general public as well as approval from governments?
Naja, would be in a way cautious and modest to say, let's start with sequestration in Norway, or also why not in the Netherlands? And let's first of all do the steps to have the infrastructure, and let's also do all the steps to have the capture in place. I mean, as I mentioned, that is about 60% of the costs, and that is also something which is quite individual. I mean, the capture process in the power plant is different from kind of a steam reformer, and then you have also capture in the cement industry, which is totally different. So that is something I think which should be a reasonable first step, and that is also something which, how should I say, Germany was always driven by technology and industrial policy, and that fits very well with that, to try to enforce sequestration inside Germany would waste, in my mind, a lot of political credit eventually. I think that's too contentious for the time being. It would be a big success if we can succeed that transport and eventually, so to speak, intermediate storage can be handled in Germany. Intermediate storage that would be needed to even out the carbon dioxide stream. I mean, the carbon dioxide may not be produced in a very steady process. I mean, in cement, yes, in steel industry, yes, or in the kind of steam reformers behind the steel industry and ammonia industry, these are steady processes. But then when it comes to carbon dioxide capture from power plants, that is increasingly unsteady because power plants are run in load following mode to compensate for the ups and downs of the renewables. And that means that also the carbon dioxide from that process will be quite unsteady. So that in order to equalize that, then one might use the large salt domes and eventually then the salt caverns produced out of that to temporarily store carbon dioxide. So when you have a peak of carbon dioxide production, then you store it, and when the carbon dioxide produced is a bit lower, then you take some of the carbon dioxide out to have a steady flow to Norway. That is something which is not covered in legislation at all. So if we could cover those things, that would be big step forward. And again, don't forget that a major part is really the capture process. Now, there is a concrete project to capture carbon dioxide and to collect it by Uniper together with a Belgian partner, TRE, which foresees to collect carbon dioxide by a relatively large pipeline system in Germany and to bring it then to the coast, for example, to Wilhelmshaven. And then the vision is to exchange it with LNG and to bring the carbon dioxide via the same tanker back to somewhere in the Middle East, and then to produce out of green hydrogen together with the carbon dioxide, the Sabatier process, methane, which then would be green methane. Now, that is a very interesting idea, but it's a little bit for the future, I believe. But the part to say we collect carbon dioxide in Germany, bring it to the North Sea coast, and then let's say for a few decades we would rather sequester it in Norway until such visions come true, where you would so to speak produce green methane from green hydrogen. Now, with a process which is not yet also at industrial scale, and then also have a tanker shuttle with LNG from green gas in one way and green and carbon dioxide the other way. But there is some first ideas to have carbon dioxide collection by pipeline, also from the eastern part of Germany. There's a project which is investigated, which was triggered by Total. So something is moving there. But it's still again, I mean, the first point would be we do all of these things which don't cost money, all the legislation, all the conceptual thinking, all the creation of institutions which are needed and processes and procedures. And in parallel, we push forward with some of the carbon capture technologies and do what can be done easily. That is capturing carbon dioxide from ammonia, where don't have extra costs. Basically, you do it anyhow. And then also to bring in the steel industry, because we still want to have a steel cluster in Germany and also in Europe. And so we have to be a bit cautious that the United States will not have green steel before we have it. I mean, they have the support now, and that is directed at decarbonizing the industry. And as the Americans, I mean, they may not have the visions, maybe, but they are pragmatic and they do it. So in that regard, we should really also be pragmatic.
Absolutely. And seeing as Germany wants to achieve net zero by 2045, it's absolutely necessary. It's telling me here that we have less than 1 minute remaining.
Okay.
It wasn't supposed to do that. I don't know why Zoom is doing that, but we can rejoin the same link, and then I can edit that bit out and then just link it together.
Yeah, that's fine. So
Okay.
I would go out and then
Yeah.
link again to the same link, yeah?
Yeah, that's correct. But it seems it's carrying on now. It's telling me there's less than a minute remaining, but
Okay.
it seems to be
Mm.
carrying on.
Okay. Now,
In terms of public and government backing for projects, let's say, you know, a company, a private company decides to come up with a project. Once you have all the legislation in place, what features should it have in order to gain the public's back? So, regarding setting up sequestration projects, what features should a project have in order for it to gain public backing as well as government approval, in your opinion?
Naja, again, for Germany, I think the main issue is that the transport of carbon dioxide. I believe that if it's transported by tanker, that would not create too much opposition. If you build a pipeline, then of course you have to go most likely through the same procedure like building a pipeline for natural gas. In fact, that is also suggested, I guess, by the legislation. So then you have all the opposition that you always have, and you have to watch if you cross natural protected areas and all that kind of things. So I'm not sure if it would create too much opposition. I mean, unfortunately, we have a very very problematic project here in the Rhine area, which is a carbon monoxide pipeline. And carbon monoxide compared to carbon dioxide, that is really toxic. Carbon dioxide, yes, if you have a certain concentration in the air, then you don't get enough oxygen after a while, like if you mount on a high mountain. But carbon monoxide is really toxic, and so many people would not distinguish eventually between carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. So that is certainly something which must be made clear to the public, that carbon dioxide is not dangerous. Again, when it comes to sequestration projects, for the time being, and probably also in other countries, I think starting offshore is the best way to do it, because there's no no big risk involved with any leakage. And one must say that so far in Sleipner and in Snøhvit, there were no leakages at all. I mean, this is very well surveyed, and yeah, so there's basically it's a non-problem. And again, overall, what is a must is that you have enough income to pay for all the chain from carbon capture, transport to sequestration. And of course, you must also have mechanisms in place that the carbon dioxide that you sequester at the end of the chain is credited kind of up this chain to the point where you capture it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense economically. I believe that another element which settles in slowly is to make clear that without carbon capture and sequestration, you will just miss the ambitious targets that Germany has. That is key, and we see some developments in that regard, that there's an opening of the discussion to say, yes, we should have carbon sequestration. But then the point is, we are now in 2022. The target here is 2045. Net zero by 45 is good. It's not yet, so to speak, keeping with the carbon budget, but it's nevertheless relative close to it. But it's only 23 years to go. That's not very much. So one should really, we push forward, because time is really short.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, do you have any other further comments or insights you would like to share before we wrap up?
Naja, the main comment is, so to speak, we have to start to take action, and on a broader scale, and certainly also conceptually think on a broader scale, and do everything which can be done early on without incurring too much costs and without too much political opposition. If you if you ask me for a last sentence on all of this, then I would refer to Gro Harlem Brundtland. She was Norwegian prime minister twice. She was the head of the Brundtland Commission, who was writing this famous report, Our Common Future, which was the basis for the Rio conference. And she was really a very energetic and remarkable lady. But she always said, I mean, look, gas and oil, all that is fine. Human intelligence is not. So that is, so to speak, the appeal to say, let's use our joint common intelligence to avoid climate change and climate disaster.
Absolutely. Very wise closing remarks, Ralf. Thanks very much. And, at the Carbon Capture Technology Expo, we share all the innovations created by human intelligence. So all the latest technologies to do with carbon capture. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ralf. Thank you for your time and your insights. And I hope to chat with you soon. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.